So why would you bother benchmarking your supply chain? What's benchmarking all about, and why would you bother doing it? Hi, this is Rob O'Byrne from Logistics Bureau, and in this very short video I'd just like to introduce you to the topic of benchmarking and kind of sow a seed to show you how some businesses are using it to actually get really ahead of the competition, so much so that sometimes their supply chains are operating at half the cost. And right at the end of the video there'll be an opportunity to find out more. So think about your own supply chain for a moment. Do you measure your supply chain performance? What kind of things do you measure? How do you think your supply chain is performing? Look at this very simple diagram here, this pyramid diagram, and there's 4 levels on that. And I'd like you to think about where your supply chain sits on that level. The bottom level is one that we call being blissfully unaware. So this is really people who kind of measure their supply chain performance. They're not really sure what good performance is, what it should be, and they're really totally unaware of how they could improve performance. That's really not a good place to be, and hopefully your supply chain isn't there. The next level up is what I've called good enough, and that's kind of comfortable. You feel that you're fairly competitive in terms of service and cost, you haven't got any major dramas, and it's that, it's a little bit like that story of boiling the frog, isn't it? The water's getting hotter around you, but you don't really notice. You're kind of not blissfully unaware, but you're happy with what's going on, and you're really not feeling that you have to perform better. You're doing okay. And that's a really dangerous spot to be honest. That's why I put that red line there, because there isn't the urgency or the drive to actually improve performance. Once we get above that red line, the BIC, that stands for best in class. And we've been benchmarking supply chains now for over 20 years. We use the SCORE methodology from the USA, and it's an internationally accepted standard that best in class is the top 20% of performers in any given industry. If you're in the top 20%, you can regard yourself as best in class. Do you think you're there yet? Now, within that 20%, what we've found is that those who provide best-in-class cost and best-in-class service performance are actually only the top 2% in every industry. Maybe you're not quite there yet in the top 2%, but perhaps we can urge you and motivate you to try and get into that top 2%. So think about where you are in that diagram. Are you blissfully unaware? Are you kind of comfortable? Are you happy that you're best in class already? Or would you really like to strive for that top 2%? What I'm going to do at the end of this very short video is show you why some organisations can actually perform at half the cost of the others. But first of all, I want to take you on a very simple little journey about benchmarking and tell you a couple of stories. Now, we all know in terms of managing any operation, there's that great saying that you can't improve what you don't measure. Think about the KPIs that you use in your own supply chain while I run through a couple of stories. And I'm actually going to use sporting analogies here, and you'll see why in a second. Now, you may recognize this runner. This is Roger Bannister, and this is him in 1954 breaking the mile record at 3 minutes 59.4. Had anyone actually been trying to beat the mile record before then, do you think? Sure they were. But no one had actually managed to do it until 1954 when Roger Bannister did it. And people had been training and struggling and running their hearts out, and no one had actually broken through that 4-minute mile barrier. He did it in 1954. 6 weeks later, a guy by the name of Landy beat his record. So hang on, why, for decades people have been trying to beat 4 minutes. He does it in 1954, Landy does it 6 weeks later, and by the end of 1957, 16 people had broken the record, and now it's run significantly quicker. So what does that tell us about performance? Well, the lesson from this is that sometimes there's an artificial glass ceiling. There's a perception that we think this is, the best performance that's achievable, and we don't think we can break through that glass ceiling. And it takes an individual or an organisation to break through, and then suddenly, it's commonplace, everybody can do it. And that's exactly what happened with the 4-minute mile. First of all, Roger Bannister broke it, people could see that it could be broken, Landy did it 6 weeks later, and now, most sort of top-class runners can beat it. So think about your supply chain for a second. What do you perceive as the best possible performance that you can achieve? maybe that's actually a glass ceiling that you could break through. The next analogy that I'm going to talk about is Usain Bolt. Now, we all know Usain Bolt. I just had to check the figures here. His record still stands at 9.58 for the 100-meter record. Why do I show a picture of Usain Bolt, fastest man in the world? Well, again, if you're thinking about your business performance and supply chain performance, and you're wondering how good could we be, you've really got to know, well, who's the best? And what is their performance? You know, if I want to become a great 100-meter runner, a bit late in the day for me, but I need to know what's the number to beat. So whatever your industry, do you know the number to beat in your industry for supply chain performance? Whether it be, cost as percentage of sales or service levels, do you know who the best is and what that target number is to chase and perhaps beat? So again, another lesson that we can draw from sport. We need to know what the target is before we can actually try and beat it. And the third one that I'd like to talk about is this guy, Johnny Weissmuller. Now, Johnny Weissmuller is very well known as an American actor who performed in the Tarzan movies. And in fact, he was so good, his Tarzan yell is still very often used in Tarzan movies. What a lot of people don't realize, though, is he was actually an Olympic swimmer. He was probably one of the best swimmers we have ever seen. Now, if you don't know anything about Johnny Weissmuller, let me just tell you that he won 5 gold Olympic medals. He won a bronze medal. He won, I think it was 4 in 1924 in Paris, and then in 1928 in Amsterdam. I think he got another gold. And the bronze he got actually in water polo, because one of the water polo team was sick. I think he had flu or something, and they said, "Hey, Johnny, you're a good swimmer. Jump in the pool and join the water polo team." And he got a bronze in that. Johnny Weissmuller held, I think, something like 57 US records. He held every record, every world record at some stage, from 100 meter swimming to half a mile, every single one. And he retired undefeated. And what did they say when he retired? Nobody will ever beat Johnny Weissmuller's records. He was the perfect swimmer. I think he was 6'2". He had huge feet like flippers. They designed a special stroke just for him. He was never, ever going to be beaten. He was the perfect swimmer, held every single record possible. And what happened? Who can actually swim quicker than Johnny Weissmuller now? I think at the last Olympics, 14-year-old girls were swimming faster than Johnny Weissmuller. So again, what lesson can we draw from that in terms of benchmarking and measuring our performance? Well, it's the fact that we might be the best now, but there's a whole bunch of people coming up behind us who are trying to be better than us. And eventually they may well overtake us. So we've got to continuously improve our performance in all areas. 3 very quick sporting analogies. We might have that artificial target, remember the 4-minute mile, but someone's going to break through it. And then, when someone does, everybody does it. Remember Usain Bolt, who's the best in your industry? What's their performance? What's the number that you've got to beat? And remember Johnny Weissmuller, the best ever swimmer in the world. No one was ever going to beat him. 14-year-old girls beat him now. So we've got to think about those sort of analogies when we're thinking about our supply chain performance. Now, I said I'd mention that the top performers in supply chain actually perform at half the cost of their competitors. So just have a look at this chart for a moment. This is some records that we've been tracking over the last 20 years in benchmarking all different industries. I'm just showing 6 different industries here. But in every industry that we look at, and we saw this trend about 10 years ago, we found that in each industry, the best performers in terms of service delivered that service at half the cost of their competitors in every industry. Give or take a % or 2, it's half the cost, every industry. How can that be possible? Just think about that for a moment. Because when I went to university, I learned that as service levels increase, so costs increased exponentially. What we found year after year is that that is not true. As service improves, so cost drops. You want to find out how that's possible? Well, what I'm going to suggest is that you can actually come along to one of our free executive breakfasts. Now, you've got to be in Australia, by the way, and you've got to be in Melbourne or Sydney in May. On the 23rd of May, we're having a breakfast in Melbourne, and on the 25th of May, we're having a breakfast in Sydney. And I'm going to bring along one of our subject matter experts in terms of benchmarking, Stephen Thacker, and he's going to step through this in detail. He's going to show you how you can actually benchmark your own supply chain, identify the critical areas that you've got to improve on, get an understanding of what best in class is for your industry, and start to leapfrog the competition to improve your performance. And so maybe you can start to get towards the top 2%, and you can be the one in your industry providing the best service and doing it at half the cost. How does that sound? So look, I hope you can come along and join us at that breakfast in Melbourne and Sydney. I'm not sure where you're watching this video, but there'll either be a registration link below the video or perhaps to the right where you can register. If you haven't been along before, they're really cool, these breakfasts. We start generally at 7:30. We have you out by 9 o'clock so you can get back to the office. They're fairly sort of intimate gathering. We tend to limit it to about 40 or 50 people. You get a nice hot breakfast, lots of great networking, lots of great information, and you'll be well on the way to understanding how you can actually get in that top 2% of performers. I'll see you there.